Hey folks, welcome back to another video. So I initially planned to make a long video about 5.1, but it's just too much information, so I think it's better to spread it out and focus on certain topics in certain videos. So on this one here, I want to focus on the voice spread and also how you can utilize this to make an additive synthesizer with the grid and other devices. So here is the polygrid. We have it in monophonic mode, voice stacking is off, right? To make an additive synth, we need multiple sine partials on different frequencies, right? So we take here a sine oscillator, we take an envelope here, and we take an audio output, and we have basically just a monophonic sine oscillator synth. We also use here a peak limiter just to make sure, and we lower the volume maybe by 5 or 6. And then we go back here to the device parameter, and we want to use multiple sine partials, and we can do this by increasing here the voice stacking up to 16 voices. So now each sine partial or sine oscillator on each voice plays on the same frequency. So it's just getting louder. Nothing else happens. So we need to spread out these frequencies, and we can do this by in multiple ways, right? The first easy way would be to use here the new stack modulators. We can use here stack spread, looks like this. And we get basically a value between 0 and 1. So we can take this output here and can say we want to increase here the pitch offset, right? So each voice gets a different number between 0 and 1. So maybe when we modulate this here by, let's say 24 semitones, right? Voice 0 doesn't do anything, so it's pitch 0, which means it's the root or the fundamental. And then the first voice gets maybe, I don't know, 2 semitones up. The second voice gets 4 semitones up, and so on. So it depends on how much you modulate your basically the pitch offset, right? And I also want to use here maybe a spectrum so we can see how it looks like. So this is how it sounds, right? We get just a big pile of frequencies, and we can spread this more out here. Right? So it's all about using here this voice spread or stack spread modulator to spread out the frequencies on each voice differently. You can also influence here with some manual sliders how this pans out, but I don't want to go into that. I want to explain here basically all these parameters, all these options. So we just used here 0 to 1, right? We can also use -1 to +1, which means some voices or voice 0 actually goes to minus, let's say we modulate this here by 12. So it goes to -12 semitones, right? So you get frequencies for the oscillator below the root node or the key input you are using on your keyboard. We can also go to value here and then use different values here, manual, or we can go for flipped, simple reciprocals. It's a hard word to spell for me, reciprocals, right? And then we can also increase this. So the distances or the ratios between the partials are different, dependent on what kind of mode you're using here. You can also use straight. You can see harmonic relationships. So the first voice is 1, the second voice is 1.5 or a half, and a fourth, and so on, right? So harmonic relationships. And you can spread this out by changing here the modulation amount. And sometimes you get really, really nice belly or atonal sounds out of this. Okay, so this is an option. You have multiple things you can try out here. Golden prime straight is interesting, but you can also use your randomize. So when you go for random, then this number here is modulated, by random. Each voice gets a different random number. Or let's go here to random up down. So you get random outcomes for the frequency. Can be interesting sometimes. If you want to stay harmonic, instead of modulating here the semitones on the oscillator itself, we can also use here a pitch in, and then let's say a transpose and a quantizer. So we quantize here everything to a scale. And then we use this here for the transpose. Let's go all the way up. So then each partial or each sine oscillator kind of is in a scale of, is in the scale. So you can change the scale here, of course, with the pitch quantize, and then you can make these kind of overtones harmonic. If you don't want to use any of these modes here, you can also go for a different stack modulator here. You can use voice control. And we have now here 16 modulator outputs. This is the first voice, second voice, third voice, fourth voice, fifth voice, and so on. And you can say the first voice doesn't do anything. The second voice maybe is here, let's say, 2 octaves higher, right? The third voice is maybe has a different skew and is just has a ratio of maybe 5:1, right? And there's a different AD setting, so you can dial in manually what should happen on each voice manually. So here we have 16 voices. I don't want to dial in 16 parameters here, so pull this down to maybe 3 or 4. Right? So each partial now, each of these 3 partials has different settings for each voice, or for each partial here, which makes it interesting for sound design. You can dial in very specific ratios, very specific loudness levels in AD settings for certain harmonics, and can try to mimic certain instruments this way. So very helpful. You can also use this modulator, of course, to change the volume of something. For instance, you can use here the amplify. You can say voice 2 has a lower volume and the third voice here goes all the way down and so on, right? And can change. Or maybe the root fundamental is lower. Or you just delete this here and go for a different module. You can change here this with the voice mix. It looks like this. When you click on it, you can see on the left side in Inspector you have now for each voice you have here a volume slider. And the big benefit of this is that you can modulate this. So you can take an LFO or random modulator and can say, I want to modulate here different volumes on different voices differently. So a lot of options actually to modify sounds and to modulate partials and create voices in different ways. It's basically unlimited possibilities, right? So here we have this. Maybe let's delete this here. Go for a spread again. Stack spread straight. Pitch this up. We can go in here and say second partial is this loud, third partial is this loud. And like I said, you can modulate this. You can also change the panning of each partial. Unlimited power, in my opinion. Instead of working here with the voice spread or stack spread modulator, we can also rely on the grid itself because we have here this voice info module. which gives you basically the index of the current voice, which is just a number, and the size of the voice stack itself. So here we have 4 voice stacks, right? So the size is basically 4. So we can take here a readout, and I probably have to play a number here. Maybe reduce the voices, increase the voices. So 4 gives you 4, right? 5 gives you 5. So on each voice you get the number of 5. But from the first ear you get the index of the current voice. So on voice 1 you get 1, or in this case here it's 0.8 because we have the normalize feature on. Yeah, I have to explain this basically. So normalize basically means here it scales the voice stack index output from 0 to 1. So if this is enabled, voice 1 gets, I don't know, 0.1, voice 2 gets 0.2, and so on. But it never exceeds the number 1, right? So here we have 2 voices, so voice 1 gets 0, voice 2 gets 0.5, because we have 2 voices, and if you spread out 2 voices between 0 and 1, you get, of course, 1 0 and 1 0.5. If you use 3, you get 0.66 here for the last, or for the last voice, I think, and so on. So it spreads out basically the index number between 0 and 1. This is what the normalize thing does. If you disable this here, each voice gets an integer. So this means, as you can see here, 3 on voice 3 or 4, I think it's the last one here, you get 3. So voice 1 gets 0, voice 1 gets 0, voice 2 gets 1, voice 3 gets 2, and so on. So the first voice is always indexing 0, and the last one here for 4 voice stacks or for 4 voices you get 3. Okay, I hope this makes sense. I probably explained it wrong, but you get for each voice a number. That's the simple explanation. Each voice gets a number, and normalize basically decides how high this number is. If this is on, the number is always between 0 and 1. If this is off, each voice number gets a real integer number. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So with this number, you can make calculations and spread out different sine partials to different frequencies. So because we have here normalize off and we get here integers, we can just take here a modulator out, just to make this easy peasy, a modulator out and modulate here the ratio settings. And you probably already know this. The ratio settings gives you exactly the harmonic series as overtones. So 1 1 is fundamental, 2 1 is basically the second harmonic, 3 1 is the third harmonic, and so on. So here we get 0 for the first voice, so we modulate this here by 1. Okay, so we have here 1 for 0 for the first voice, so 1 1. Then we get 1 for the second voice, so we have 2 1, and so on. So this should give you harmonic overtones here. If we increase here the number, voice taking to 16, we have now 16 different sine partials here, just by modulating the ratio here with the index number. Okay, the problem now is here, as you can see, all partials are the same loudness. So you can go here to the voice mix again. You can turn down certain partials here to a certain volume level. So this is a bit tedious for 16 voices, right? So that's not what I want to do. So I'm just using here an amplify, use this and turn this down. So each voice gets a higher number, and the higher the number is, the more we turn it down in volume, so higher frequencies get quieter and the root or the fundamental stays at the same volume. And then you can also work here with the modulator out here with the offset, basically. So you can spread out the frequencies. Or make them closer together. Or different settings for skew, so the root or the fundamental stays basically at the 0 position here, and the higher you get, the more skew you introduce, or the other way around, or whatever. You can do so much things and try out different ideas to create overtones this way. Another idea is to map certain partials to a step mod setting. So we can use here a step mod and increase the number here to 16 because we have 16 voices, right? And we disable here the phase input. And we know probably, or you know probably, how the phase input works, right? So this is the position here. If we use a value input, 0 is at the first position. If you go up to 100% or 1, we end up here on the last step. So it's a value between 0 and 1. Here we get the value between 0 and 16 or 15. So we need another of these voice info things here, our modules, and we switch the normalize on. So now we have a value between 0 and 1. So exactly what we need here for the step mod. So we get this kind of thing here. So each bar or step here represents basically a voice. And instead of using here this modulator output and modulator amplify, we disable or delete here the modulation. We can take this modulation here and go maybe down to this, or maybe we go, let's go down here and then go up. And now we can change the volume of each partial differently. Right? So everything is possible. Probably also have to turn this down here a bit. Something like this. So you can also use here a second one and say, this is maybe, let's say, this is bipolar. So we go up and down, and we use this to change the pitch offset here for certain things. So you can change basically the pitch offset for each partial here differently. So maybe this should stay the same. And here we want to have different pitch offsets. We probably have to go. It gets pretty atonal, but you get the idea, right? So you can make nice sounds just with that. This is okay. Just go to 1 here. Okay, or you can say I want to make one here for, let's say, for the decay setting, right? So we go to 0 here, and we modulate the decay setting. So we want to have more decay on the lower partials, and then we want to slowly. Right? So you can change the envelopes for different partials differently. So like I said, so many possibilities. If you don't like the step mod, you just use maybe curves for that. It works exactly the same. So here we take this as a phase input. We go to 100%. We switch this here to hold, and if we go into the editor here, you can see we have each voice here laid out on this curve. And we can now draw in basically our frequency response of the synth, right? So these are the lower partials here, these are the higher partials. Maybe something like this. And then of course we have to use here the output instead of go to 1 here. Okay, so instead of using here basically a step mod, you use a curve thing, and then you can use the editor here, the curve editor, to draw in your frequency response. So these are the lower frequencies, these are the higher frequencies. Easy. So if you don't like additive synthesis and you're more like a modal guy, then you can remove the sign here with the filter. So let's start you with the SVF maybe. Use a bandpass filter here, and instead of modulating here the pitch input, we modulate this here, pull this down, and go here into that. Just remove that. And we need here maybe a noise input. Noise, AD. Just take this and try it out. And we, of course, we need to change here something because the frequencies are not spread out here with the ratio. So something like that. Or we use a ratio module here. And then we do the same thing here, just modulate by 1. And maybe use the, that's the offset, right? Yeah. So we can offset certain frequencies here for the filter on different voices differently. So it's the same thing as before, but instead of using a sine oscillator, we use here basically a bandpass filter. And yeah, the rest is the same. So if you don't like to use noise, then you can just remove the noise and use an audio input here, right? And then you use in front of that maybe a synthesizer or maybe a sample or an audio track or whatever you want to use, right, as an input, maybe noise textures. So this is also something you can try out with this. But I use most of the times, I use just noise. Sounds great. Nice metallic sound. And you probably already noticed that we have only 16 partials, so there is a lot of stuff missing in the top end, right? So usually you have over 1000 partials. But when I edit something in the wavetable editor of Serum, I usually only edit in the first 16 partials, and everything on top is basically, it's not, yeah, I don't dial in anything. So you can use here the shapers, the new ones, to create some harmonic overtones. Maybe the howl here. Right? And these ones bring in a lot of overtones by, yeah, using these partials you have here, these 16 partials, and creating overtones for each of these partials. Or maybe use here heat. yeah, it's a nice little playground for additive and modal synthesis now with the voice stacking. And I don't know if they maybe in the future amp these number up here to 32 or even more, then it gets really interesting. But in my opinion, 16 is more than enough. And sometimes my CPU is dying out from that, but I think it's just an optimizing problem from the beta. So probably in the future versions, it's much more CPU friendly. But yeah, I want to give you basically a small little idea thing, inspiration video, how you can approach additive synthesis, modal synthesis in the grid with the new voice stacking options. There's so much stuff you can do with the voice stacking, also on the node grid and so on. But I just leave it at that for the moment for this video, and I probably do a lot of more videos in the future. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel, leave a like if you like the video, and thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.